Thanks for signing up to the webinar. Let's get started. Welcome to the presentation today. Here you're going to discover how to get privacy and safety for your high value assets. And we do that with a business trust strategy for title. Title is the same thing as ownership. My name is James Billings. This particular presentation is for private investors, it's for family office principals, it's for political or high-profile individuals, financial advisors, and business people. Here's a little bit about my professional credentials and experience, and they are in the field of securities, aviation, and also real property. In all of these particular professional pursuits, on behalf of clients and also myself, title was always important to these high-value assets. I learned about financial statements, I learned about taxes, I learned about the securities markets. In the airplanes, we learned about designing your outcome and situational awareness. Situational awareness is really a big part of what this business trust is all about. And then, of course, with real property, we had to learn about deeds. Deeds were always the ultimate part of any particular transaction, either on the way in or on the way out. And so in all these particular pursuits, and especially with the real estate, that's when I began using the trust for asset privacy or for title privacy. That was with real estate. That was back in the mid-90s. And it's really been a fascinating adventure to be able to evolve all of this and show you how this stuff works and why it's so stinking important. Now, let's just kind of go through what are high-value assets. High-value assets fit into a variety of different categories. And we have real property. Real property for generations and for the millennial has always been the most important and highest value assets that any individual could ever own for thousands of years. And today we see land, we see buildings. Now, something new that we didn't have before, we have these notes and we have equity. And those are different than originally the way it was. But those, again, are also all high value assets. We have intangibles such as royalties. We've got crypto. We've got options. You have stock options in startup companies. You have angel investors that are looking to invest in a company, a series fund. Maybe they want a little anonymity or privacy in that particular pursuit. And then we have just securities in general that people have. And then we have family assets, premarital assets, inheritance, pending inheritance. And then we also have liens. Liens are negative, but again, they're high value assets and they can impact, your personal financial affairs. And so with these three categories by themselves, that talks about high value assets. We also have collectors that have artwork. We have automobile collection. We got aircraft. We got watercraft. And of course, banking and brokerage is always considered a high value asset. We can have those onshore, we can have them offshore. There's some specific offshore strategies as well. And then for business people, maybe you got a business operation, you're starting a new business, you got a subsidiary, you got an import-export operation, or maybe you just need a nominee for a transaction you're trying to do. And in all cases, all of these, the business trust is going to fit into the overall game plan. Now, when you're acquiring these assets or you're looking to change the ownership of these particular assets, there's typically a couple of different ways that you can hold title. Either hold it in your personal name or you use a business organization in order to hold title. And with those business organizations, they've got a lot of benefits to them. There are a lot of features that we're looking for with those business organizations. We've got limited liability. We're concerned about that. We'll talk more about limited liability history in a little bit. And then we've got entity shielding. Entity shielding is the separation of your personal assets from your business assets, and that's to provide you with protection. We also have transferable shares or transferable stock. And then we also have income tax options. Okay, you got a group of people coming together into a joint venture, stockholders, shareholders. Okay, how do we allocate the income tax obligation? So those are always a part of a business organization. And then for more sophisticated users, maybe we're going to use this corporation for a private syndication, or you could use the LLC. Also with public finance. Public finance is part of how people participate in different business ventures. And so these are part of your standard business organizations. Now, mind you, this is for a different purpose than what we're talking about, the business trust. The business trust, in our particular situation, we're looking for it for privacy and safety. So there's a different objective here. Now, these standard business organizations, such as your corporations, your LLCs, and your limited partnerships, they're visible online. And that may be okay for a lot of people, but the internet has changed everything with respect to visibility of your business organization. You see them registered to the Secretary of State. All the information you provide to the Secretary of State, resident agent, your officers, your directors, addresses, that's all going to be in that database at the Secretary of State. And if you used an LLC to acquire real estate, all that information is going to be down at the recorder's office as well. So you got Secretary of State, you got the recorder's office, so you have this visibility. And that's just part of the territory these days. Now, one of the things is that this leaves you vulnerable to hackers and thieves, and also business identity theft. We'll talk about that more. And then also your competitors and your busybodies. Now, if you're doing public finance, you got a big deal going on, you've got public investors, these business organizations are just great as is. But if you're looking for privacy, you're looking for safety for certain select assets, then you need something different. And what that something different is, and something better, is your business trust company, because of the fact that they're invisible online. They're unlisted in many cases with the Secretary of State. We've got some specific strategies for handling that. And at the county recorder's office, if you use a trust for title, it's going to be anonymous. It's not going to connect to anything else. If you use an LLC, everybody can find it. But with the business trust, it's going to be an anonymous title. It's not going to have any connections. And so it keeps you safer from the hackers and the thieves. It keeps you away from the business identity theft and also your competitors and busybodies. So if you're looking for that asset privacy and also that safety, the business trust company is really the tool to be using. Here's an example of a private client. We helped them out. They were buying a $5 million building with an SBA loan, and they wanted anonymity. The founders of the company wanted to make certain that they had their privacy intact. So we came up with a Latin name, we use the Roman numerals, and if you go look this up on Google, you're not going to find anything. I'm not going to tell you what county it's in, but nonetheless, the point is that it's going to be anonymous, and that's what we're looking for in certain cases, and that's what we're talking about here today. One of the other questions that comes up, okay, we've got all this invisibility, we're unlisted. Is there anybody that does know about these business trust organizations? Well, the people you do business with, okay, your insiders versus your outsiders. And your insiders would be like, for instance, your bankers. When you do your bank account, you need to provide them with information about who you are and what you're doing. Okay, but again, the bankers are insiders. These are not people on Google looking up, your business organization. Those are the outsiders. And those guys are not going to be able to find this information. And that's what the objective is here. We're trying to keep the outsiders out of our internal affairs. So again, anybody that you share the information with, your associates, anybody on the inside, they're going to know about it. But what we're trying to do here with the business trust, we're trying to keep the outsiders outside of our business. Now let me just share with you about the difference between the business trust and living trust. They're not the same. They have a different purpose. The living trust is what we call a personal trust, and the business trust is what we call a commercial trust. Here's the two different trust categories. The trust categories are personal and commercial. The personal trusts are to distribute estate. That's what its purpose is. Okay, it's a charitable trust, it's a testamentary trust, it's a living trust. Now the commercial trust is to conduct commerce. Commercial trusts include REITs, they include mutual funds, they include the business trust we're talking about today, statutory and non-statutory. But all of them, their ostensible purpose is to conduct commerce. Now, the purpose between the commercial and the business is different, but the architecture is identical. They all have the same basic architecture. Okay, here's the architecture. There are four essential elements of any trust: living trust, business trust, charitable trust, any kind of trust. And you have the intention to create the trust, the people that are putting it together, one or more people. You have assets that go into the trust. You have somebody that administers it, that watches out for it, which is what we call the trustee. And then you have the people that get the financial benefits from it. And those are what we call the beneficiaries. So those are the four basic elements of any trust. Now here's a little bit about business organization history. Let's kind of take a step back in time, back into the English time, 17th century. We see that shipping is the big form of business at that time. And so the investors were coming together, they're trying to figure out how to import and export different materials and raw goods, and it's shipping at that time. The investors were concerned about what kind of limited liability they might have if a shipment, well, for instance, they've got gold or they've got raw materials, and they're traversing many thousands of miles of open ocean. What happens if one of those shipments goes down? Who's going to pay for those losses? Well, they're concerned about what kind of a liability they might have. And so the idea for the corporation was invented. It's working its way through the courts, not quite fully baked yet. And so at that point, we need an act of parliament in order to get a corporate charter. And so with that act of parliament, what that means is that they were highly scarce to get a corporate charter, and they were very difficult to obtain. Now, at the same time, what's going on in the courts, the common law courts, the courts of equity, is that we see these trusts working their way through the system. We see living trusts. We see the charitable trusts. We also see these business trusts. They're called unincorporated associations. And they're what is essentially a private contract. And so they're highly common. Everybody's using them. Now, in England, there's a couple of high-profile examples I'll share with you here, and that is we got the London Stock Exchange. We got the Lloyd's Insurance Group. So you have people coming together. They don't want a corporation. They have a whole different objective altogether. Of course, the corporations are difficult, by the way, and that's what they're using. They're using these business trusts in order to conduct their business and provide themselves with some protection and come together in a joint venture. In the United States, several hundred years later, we're seeing Standard Oil, we're seeing United States Steel, we're even seeing AT&T set up as a business trust. Could they be corporations? Of course they could, but they decided that they wanted to use the business trust structure. So these have been around for hundreds of years. Now with those guys like the Standard Oil, United States Steel, I mean, there were certain public listings for those. I mean, they had a different purpose, but still they are valid business trusts, and that's what we're using. So why do very few people know about these business trusts? How come they don't use them? I mean, LLCs, of course, are popular, corporations. That's what everybody talks about at the investment clubs, or that's what they hear about from their attorneys, and so said do this and do that. And so there's really not much conscious thought about it. And so we need to sort of stop and take a look at it. But here, again, these corporations and LLCs, the limited partnerships, they're highly profitable for the lawyers. They're highly profitable for the Secretary of State. They keep government control. Now remember, the state really doesn't care about your privacy. I mean, yeah, they want to keep your account password and all that stuff private, but as far as your privacy for your high value assets, that's not on their agenda. They have no interest whatsoever in any of that. So, they're not going to help you with that. That's up to you. You've got to do that yourself. These commercial trusts are rare in law school, and your garden variety attorney is not going to know about these commercial trusts. They know about the living trust. That's 98% of what they learn in law school. And then, of course, you got the state legislature. It's made up of a bunch of attorneys, right? So they do, the regular stuff. They do the corporations and LLCs. That's where they make their money. Now, I talked about the commercial trust. I talked about the REITs and the mutual funds. Those are highly specialized attorneys. Those are in-house guys. They're using the statutory trust. It's completely different. For us, and what we're trying to do with our objective, which is this asset privacy and safety, corporations and LLC is the standard format. But the business trusts don't provide any incentive. There's no financial incentive on behalf of the state legislature, on behalf of the Secretary of State, or the attorneys to talk to us about them, especially the ones we're talking about that are non-statutory, because they don't make any money with them. There's no financial incentive, so in consequence, they're ignorant. I mean, if you ask any attorney, any regular garden variety attorney, what a business trust is, most of the time you're going to get a blank answer. No, we don't know about those. We don't use those. The fundamental difference between the standard business organizations, the corporations, partnerships, and LLCs is that they're a creation of the state. They're a statutory creation of the state, and it requires government permission to get one. We talked about the charter, the act of parliament. Well, it's the same thing. We got the Secretary of State these days. Now, the business trusts, they do not require permission from the government. You operate with a self-governing agreement. I mean, how you want to operate your business trust, what kind of rules and regulations you have, that's entirely up to you. You don't need the government. Now, again, we did talk about the statutory business trust, okay? And so those are part of the government. But again, those are part of a lot of public finance. We're looking at the non-statutory trust because we want those for our privacy and safety. And unlike the corporations, LLCs, and partnerships, only the business trust can operate without the Secretary of State. Let me just talk about some of the obligations you have with the standard business organizations. You got your disclosures, you got your obligations, you got your fees, and you got your taxes. Many of you already know about this kind of stuff, but when you set up one of these business organizations, you got your filing with the state, you got your disclosures, your address, you got your resident agent, you have the officers, you have the directors, maybe you got the managers, you got dates. Those are part of the disclosures. Now the obligations, maybe you got a corporation, you got to keep meeting minutes. You have to issue the shares. This is one of the things people do. They'll set up a corporation, they'll set up an LLC, and they will not issue the shares. They will not identify who are the people participating in the business organization. They don't keep the meeting minutes. And these are all part of what they call the corporate veil. And you need to do this in order to get the privileges and protections of what that business organization is all about. And then you got fees and you got franchise taxes. Okay, the Secretary of State has their fees. They set their fees. They're non-negotiable. You either pay them or you don't get what they offer. And then you got franchise taxes. Here in California, they're very pricey, and that's part of having that business organization as well. Income taxes are separate, but what I'm talking about here are franchise taxes. And then you have personal risk with these business organizations. You got maybe civil lawsuits, you got tax audits, you got insurance claims. So in the event of a civil complaint, someone sues your business organization. If they look for all of your paperwork and your compliance with the Secretary of State, see if you got that veil intact, you don't have it, that can cause you a problem, come back and you can be personally liable for it. The same thing with a tax audit. If you got your federal tax audit, you got a state tax audit, and you've got deductions, maybe you've elected to use a corporate classification for the lower tax rate and so for more deductions, fringe benefits, for instance. And they say, well, let me see all your paperwork, and you don't have it, then they could recast all of your income, all of your revenues back to personal rates. I mean, that would really be a rough day. I mean, the auditor would love it because he makes a lot of money, makes him look good for his boss. But these are some of the risks that can happen in a tax audit if you haven't complied with all the obligations with your business organization. And then your insurance claims. I mean, you get fire insurance, you got liability insurance, a variety of different types of liability insurance. If you had a claim and there was an investigator that just wanted to kind of look at your records and you couldn't provide them, could they deny your claim? Well, they could. I mean, you don't have your business organization. You haven't respected it. So if you don't respect it, how are we going to respect it? So these are some of the personal risks that can come with these business organizations. Again, it's not a problem for most people, but then again, maybe it is. So you just need to be aware that these are some of the things that go along with the package. And then we were talking about the internet a little bit earlier and how the visibility is a risk to your standard business organization. Let me just mention a couple of things. And that is, there are a few states that are saying, well, come register with us. We're not going to disclose all the information, just a little bit. Okay, you've got states like Wyoming, you got New Mexico, and you got Nevada, and they're going to say, we're going to withhold certain information. We're not going to post it on the website. But here's the point, and that is you've already left a breadcrumb trail. And now, on top of these disclosures and this internet stuff, we have these business organizations. We got the Corporate Transparency Act. This was passed last year in Washington, D.C., and what's going to happen in the future is that the federal government is going to put the name, the social security number, a photo identification, maybe your passport number, a physical address of any controlling stockholder or shareholder of corporations or LLCs. There's about 2 million of them, new ones that are filed every year in the United States. So just think about that. And then, of course, it's going to be retroactive. Once they get the new guys in there, they're also going to get the old guys. So even an organization you've set up today or set up a year or so ago, that's all going to be part of this new database, the information that's going to go in this new database for the Treasury Department in the Corporate Transparency Act. So take a look at it and go look it up on Google. You can find everything out about it. It's just part of what's going on these days. And then the Secretary of State fraud I was talking about a little while ago. There's a couple different ways they can execute this. They can either hack your password, the Secretary of State, go in and change the member of your LLC, for instance, or one of the officers of your corporation. Or the other way they do it is that they'll just mail in an update. And not all the Secretary of State systems have a mechanism in there for them to notify you that there's been any kind of a change. So just think about that. Are you going to be looking online every single day to see if some hacker has gone in there and changed the officers or the managers of your LLC? I mean, that's just too much. Anyhow, but it's just one of the risks that goes along with these public registration. And in the business identity theft, on the California Secretary of State's website, they talk about business identity theft. And essentially what they say is, look, you got to provide us all this information to get your corporation, get your LLC set up. But if somebody uses it against you, and they hack you and they steal some money from you, tough luck. So anyhow, Here's an example of a guy that had an LLC that was hacked, and he had business identity theft. It was a $5 million piece of land, approximately $5 million. And the hacker, smart guy, smart in a bad way, and he hacked their website and changed the manager of the LLC, and then went and took out a $2 million hard money loan against this vacant piece of land. Now, of course, you should never own land free and clear. That's a whole nother discussion altogether, but that's what happened in this particular situation. So he replaced the manager of the LLC, went and got title, did escrow, got title insurance, of course, because the title insurance company looked up and they said, well, you're the right guy. You're the manager of this LLC, so you can sign the loan documents. So the whole thing went through. Now, did they make the first payment? Of course not. And so eventually, the default notices and the mailing addresses, it all sort of filtered back to the real guy that actually was the manager of this LLC. And then it was like, one of those, oh my gosh, oh my God moments that this has actually happened. He spent several $100,000 trying to get all this rectified, but the police agency is pointing at the Secretary of State. Secretary of State points at the title company points at the Secretary of State. I mean, everybody's pointing a finger at each other. So this is an extreme example of what happened for a guy that had an LLC, owned a piece of land, had Secretary of State fraud, and then had business identity theft. So you can go look this up too. It's on the internet, and you can see it here on the slide. So here's your benefits for a business trust company. All these issues we talked about before, all these risks with these other business organizations, they completely go away. You get protection from the state. We're completely out of their system altogether. You still get the income tax options. You can have the disregarded, you can have the partnership, you can have the corporation. You still get the limited liability. You still get the entity shielding, the separation of assets. They're suitable for Americans. They're suitable for foreign nationals. And of course, they're unlisted and they're invisible online if you do it right. Now, here's the last point, and that is about asset protection. Asset protection is a big topic these days. Everybody's talking about it. You go to these attorneys and they set up these complex structures, family limited partnerships and series LLCs. They're highly complex. My approach on all this is just keep it simple, guys. Okay, and simple is the easiest. And so your easiest and best form of asset protection is just silence. So take your special high value assets and put them into a business trust and keep them off the radar screen. Leave your plain vanilla stuff out there. You always want to have that out there, but just keep it simple. And so your least expensive and your most effective form of asset protection is silence. Let's just kind of go back and take a quick look here about the corporations versus the business trust. Several hundred years ago, the corporations were scarce. They were difficult, act of parliament. And the business trusts were very common. Everybody used them. There were thousands of them. You can read back into history. Now today, several hundred years later, the corporations, LLCs, they're common. But the problem is they're an easy target. Anybody can find them. Anybody can attack them. I mean, you've got all kinds of problems with them visibility-wise. Now again, we talked about, public companies, these big corporations. Okay, it's different. But for us, what we're trying to do here with this privacy factor is we don't want to be an easy target. And with the business trust, we're not even a target whatsoever because they can't find us. They're highly scarce. People that know how to operate a business trust, know how to set them up. I mean, it's a scarcity. I mean, everybody knows how to do corporations and LLCs, but who knows how to do a business trust? Isn't that what we're looking for in order to get this privacy? So that's what's changed over the last several hundred years. All right, now let me take you through 3 short stories of people with high value assets that had serious concerns about privacy and safety and how the business trust was the solution for them. The first guy is Tom. Tom and his family owned a portfolio of single-family home rentals up in Orange County, north of San Diego here. They've cultivated this portfolio over a period of several decades, and now they've got a good business, they got good income, they got good tenants, they maintain their properties, the values have gone up, and it's a good family business. One of the things that's relevant here is that Tom and the family had heard from all the real estate investors, all the clubs, all the real estate guys, use LLCs, use LLCs. That's what everybody's using. And then one day Tom woke up and realized that over the course of at least the last decade, he had paid over $210,000 in franchise taxes alone, let alone all the filing obligations, all the paperwork, everything else that went along with these LLCs. And he realized that the business trust was a solution for him. So what they did was that they took each one of these 27 single-family homes and deeded them from the LLC to a separate business trust, 27 different business trusts. And as a result, he was able to shut down those 27 LLCs. He was not going to pay another $210,000 over the next decade. That's money that could go to the family. So he got rid of the franchise taxes, he got rid of all the filing, all the hassles he had with the Secretary of State, and he got anonymity. And the business trust was the solution for him and the family. Now the next person here is Gina. Gina is a wheeler dealer. She was involved in a real estate venture. She had some partners and they went into a development deal. The development did not work out. Well, Gina was so excited in the very beginning, all the investors, but they wanted her to sign on a note personally. So she did. Well, when things didn't work out, they came after her, right? That's how things work. Meanwhile, she got an inheritance coming from her grandparents. Her grandparents are leaving her, I don't know, what is it, $650 or so. And if she receives that money personally with that civil judgment out there, then that money is subject to seizure or attachment. If she puts it in her personal name, she puts it in a corporation, or puts it in an LLC. I mean, if somebody owes you $3 million, you know you're going to have somebody looking in all the records, Secretary of State's record and in the bank records, in order to try to find that money. So the solution for her, the safe solution, was to use the business trust in order to receive that inheritance. She could still access the funds, but since the way it was set up, she was able to keep those inheritance funds safe from the civil judgment she had. You know, how she wants to settle up with her investors at some point in the future, that's a whole separate story altogether. But the business trust was the solution for her. So the business trust safeguarded $650,000 for her. And then the third one here is Ivan. Ivan is part of a family business. He's an heir. He's an employee of the company. He's been in business for several generations. They make industrial tools. And Ivan is engaged to be married. He's got a wonderful fiancée. The family loves the fiancée. They're looking forward to having the young family, evolve over time. But the family is also very business savvy. And they're concerned about his shares, his super voting stock in the family company being a part of the marriage. They did not want to have that as a part of any type of a prenup agreement. So the solution for them was for Ivan's stock to be vested, to be assigned to an independent business trust, independent trustee. He could still receive the income from his shares, but it was going to be safe from community property from the marriage, and it could stay outside of any type of a prenup agreement. So this was a tremendously valuable solution for a very high value asset, which was his stock in the company. So it gave the family peace of mind. It avoided all kinds of disclosures that comes with prenup agreements. Of course, a prenup agreement is a divorce plan, but we don't want to go there. And let the family develop, let the new wife come into some of the family business meetings and see how it goes. And then we can make things change as we go along. But this way, using the business trust for that stock was the way for them to go. So the end result here in all three of these short stories is that Tom was able to save a ton of franchise taxes and gained anonymity. And then Gina was able to safeguard her inheritance, and then Ivan was able to avoid having his stock be part of a prenup agreement, and it gave the family a peace of mind. And they did it with the business trust company. So if you got any questions, you like the solution, you're interested in it, let me know. Send me an email, give me a call. Thank you very much for spending a little time with us here today, and hope you enjoyed it. Our website, trustart.com, phone number, email is here as well. And that's it. All right, guys. See you later.